What if I told you the Black Death created more millionaires than any boom in history? The size of an institution does not prove its reliability. Reputation does not provide protection when the storm breaks. So what did we learn from this? We learned that the concept of too big to fail is a dangerous lie. Banks and similar financial institutions are not concerned with guaranteeing your savings. They exist to make a profit, and when they fail, they take every penny with them. You find yourself waiting in line at the bankruptcy table as a creditor. This event repeats in every century, in every geography. In the Florence collapse of the 1340s, the moment Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in 2008, and the day Lebanese banks froze accounts in 2019. We need to stop and see something else more clearly. The system may seem like a friend to you. It promises you security, stability, growth. But remember, the system is not your friend. It's just doing business with you. And business relationships end when interests conflict. How important are you to the system? And how important is the system to you? If you don't ask these questions, you allow history to repeat itself. When we think of the American Civil War, battlefields, political strife, and the abolition of slavery come to mind. Behind the gunpowder smoke and fiery speeches, another ruthless financial war was fought, one that even many Americans don't know about. The Union in the North and the Confederacy in the South learned in a bitter way that running such a large war was only possible by printing money. In the North, the government issued paper money, called greenbacks, backed by the promise, the word of the United States. At first, this was seen as a patriotic move, but as the amount of greenbacks pumped into the economy increased, the amount of goods each green piece of paper could buy gradually decreased. Inflation reduced the value of money, and people's trust in the state began to shake. In the South, the situation was much worse. The Confederacy, lacking the necessary resources to fight, printed huge amounts of graybacks. By the end of the war, Southern inflation had reached hyperinflation levels. Prices increased by thousands, tens of thousands of %. People's salaries became unable to buy anything. The salaries soldiers received at the front became worthless on the home front. Families were carrying sacks, baskets full of banknotes to buy a loaf of bread or a candle. By 1865, Confederate money was not only worthless, it was in the dusty pages of history. What mattered in the collapse was not the government promises on paper, but tangible assets. Land, food, gold, weapons, gunpowder. That is, everything that was real, tangible, useful retained its value. For Southerners, farmers, tradesmen, this was a complete disaster. Their lifelong savings turned to dust in an instant. For those with access to gold, barter-based trade, this war was a chance to seize wealth and property at very cheap prices, almost for free. This is one of the most striking examples of opportunities born in times of crisis historically. This is a lesson that most Americans rarely read in school textbooks, but should never forget. Your own country, your own lands, experienced a currency collapse. And when it happened, what protected people was that they possessed land, food, gold, weapons, gunpowder values. Another bitter truth. People in times of crisis remember what they have, not what they believed in. Trust is the thing least found when most needed. So hold value, not trust. Because value remains standing even when trust is lost. France also shows how revolutions can destroy the value of money faster and more ruthlessly than any war. In the 1790s, after the revolutionaries overthrew the monarchy and seized church lands, they issued a new paper currency to rebuild the economy: assignats. These banknotes were backed by the value of those immense church properties and were going to save France from economic chaos. The government began printing these paper notes immoderately, limitlessly. Each new printing reduced the value of the previous assignat. It was like inflating a balloon over and over. It eventually burst. Prices went out of control. Wages couldn't keep up with the increase, and in a short while, the assignat became completely worthless, turning into a piece of paper. Farmers refused to sell food for these pieces of paper. They demanded goods, wheat, oil, or silver coin instead. Bread riots broke out again in Paris. The French Revolution began sending its own supporters to the guillotine. The winners in this collapse were those who had invested in, or set aside, tangible things that the government couldn't print or multiply, like food, wine, gold, or property. For many people, this lesson was learned too late. Promises can be noble and exciting, but they are only as valuable as others accept them. Trust them. When that trust disappears, your savings vanish as if erased with an eraser. Fast forward 2 centuries, and it appears this time in Asia. In 1997, a speculative attack on the Thai baht suddenly turned into a regional financial crisis. Thailand had pegged its currency, the baht, to the US dollar. With this fixed exchange rate confidence, they borrowed huge amounts, mostly in US dollars. Everyone thought this order would continue, but the fixed peg collapsed. Overnight, debts in US dollars became impossible to repay in the local currency. Debts multiplied. Foreign investors panicked and withdrew their money. The currencies of other Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea depreciated one after another. This was called the Asian Tigers crisis. Economies shrank, unemployment soared. Governments had to ask for emergency bailout packages from the International Monetary Fund (IMF). Those most harmed by this crisis were ordinary citizens. Millions of people whose savings value melted, who lost their jobs, whose future became uncertain. The ruthless aspect of history emerged. Those with solid currencies like the US dollar, those with assets, suffered much less damage, and some even profited from this crisis. Countries and companies overly dependent on foreign currency borrowing had to submit to the harsh policies imposed by the IMF. Meanwhile, large financial institutions on Wall Street and London emerged from this crisis with profits, buying up Asia's valuable assets and companies cheaply. A local economic collapse was actually a massive wealth transfer on a global scale, from developing countries to developed ones. The lesson from here echoes in every collapse from Byzantium to Argentina to Venezuela. Borrowing in another country's currency is a death trap dependent on factors outside your control. When the storm hits, it's always the debtor who drowns, who flounders in the swamp. The picture is quite clear now. Whether it's revolutionary France, Civil War America, or Asia, the same themes, the same warning signs are before us. Paper money loses value. Excessive debt enslaves you, restricts your room to maneuver. Part 3 is the most important part. How to protect yourself before the next collapse.